Hello, my name is Roman Ginjihashvili, and this is the DVD that I've been asked several times to do. It's about English defense, but it's not the theory of it, but it's just most typical games, how to play the English defense and how not to play also. Typical mistakes and outcomes of it. So it's going to be very instructive DVD for those who likes to play English for white. The important part of this opening is you have to remember this is not Sicilian, this is not King's Indian or Slav defense, where theory is updated by the week, by the day, by the tournament. Every tournament there's something new. This is an English opening. In a theory, hasn't been changed much in decades. So, but nevertheless, it's not a very easy opening to play. It's easy opening to play, but it's not easy to play very precisely. Certain positional ideas have to be taken in consideration, and timing of conducting certain play. So sit back and enjoy these typical and very instructive games of the English opening. At first, I want to show you games with a c4 and e5. As you know, English can be also played with c5. Well, even with knight f6, but after knight f6, it's not an English yet. So black can continue d6 and g6, like going towards the King's Indian. They can play c6 Slav, or it can be any opening. Well, the basic thing is whether black is going to play eventually c5 or e5. Those two pawn moves determine that this is an English opening. Okay, the first game I want to see, it's game played on the level of 2400, and I found it very, very instructive. c45, knight c3, knight f6, g3, g6. Actually, knight c6 was like g3, g6. This is one of the most popular lines of English opening. Knight f3, d6, castle, and f5. So we got position kind of a close Sicilian with extra tempo for white. If white had played Sicilian, so it's reversed colors with extra tempo for white. d3, knight f6, and bishop g5. Well, I play English a lot, and I like to use this idea. Now, what is the point of bishop g5? White is intending to give up the dark square bishop for the knight. Well, the way it happened, actually, h6, bishop takes, queen takes. Now, black's knight does not control d5 square, and white needs to go b4 and b5 eventually to increase the activity of bishop on g2 and also play on a queen side. But knight d5 was played first, and after queen f7, rook b1. No idea, as we already know, b4 and b5. Now let's go back a couple of moves. The best way to play after bishop g5 for black, even the way they played, h6 is okay, but after knight d5, queen f7, the best thing to do before white goes b4 to play a5. Now, in order for white to play b4 and maintain good pawn structure, they have to play a3 and then b4, in which case black is gonna have a file open. It's not very significant, but it's the right thing to do. After rook b1, black castle, white goes b4, and that's the way actually I like to play as well for white. b4, g5. Now white plays correctly knight d2 to try to restrict the movement of black's central pawns, and at the same time opening the bishop on g2. Knight d4 was played. And here I don't like white's move. White has played b5, which is the part of the plan, but the reason I don't like this move is because of black played f4. Now, what I would like to do here to go e3, and after knight retreats, then continue with b5. Now if black plays f4, white has significant control on all the light squares, on e4 square, on f3 square, and I don't know, bishop e4 may be played, not right away. Maybe just simply continue with a4. It's very, very difficult to make any progress on a king side for black. However, after b5, black played f4, and now e3 move was played, and that's another mistake. Now e3 is really bad, and black went on to win the game. Now white by force gets really bad position. See, one little mistake. Now f3 was played. One little mistake. White didn't play e3 and paid the price. b5, f4, and after e3, f3. Now, white has no choice but to take the knight. Bishop cannot be retreated because of knight e2, check, and white forced to give up a queen. So, knight was taken, and black takes the bishop, king takes g2, c6, bc, bc, knight b4, and ed. What happened here? Whole white's plan completely collapsed. Well, obviously taking on c6 is bad because of bishop b7, and knight is pinned on big diagonal. White gave up the light square bishop, which is very important. They lost the outpost on d5 for knight. Black has opened the f file, and they have two bishops. It's a dramatic change after one little mistake. Now, the position is already not good. Now, I don't think it's necessary for us to go through whole game, how game ended. Position, the fact that we got what we wanted. We pinpointed the mistake white made by not playing at the right time the e3 move. Now, after knight e4, queen d7. Now you see both pawns are hanging. So black plays queen d7, protecting both pawns and intending queen h3 also. After queen d7, c5, a5, knight c2, d takes c, knight a3, queen h3 check, king g1, rook a7, and this is absolutely terrible position for white. Black is coming with rook on f7, bishop on g4. Black has very strong attack, and this is total fiasco for white. Terribly misplayed at the point where they're supposed to play e3, and they didn't. Here would have been completely different story after e3, knight e6, and then b5. Now if f4, I don't know, you can go even queen e2, or you can continue with a4. The position is really good for white here. Okay, now let's get to next game that was played with a very, very similar continuation for black. Now this game was played by two very strong masters, rated 24 and up on a FIDE scale, and it will be interesting to see what happened here. c45, knight c3 d6. It's slightly different move order, but you will see the transposition to the position we just saw before. Bishop g2, bishop g7, d3, f5, knight f3, knight f6, castle, knight c6, and bishop g5. The same thing, white is giving up dark square bishop for control of a big diagonal and playing b4, b5 with a play on a queen side. h6 was played, bishop takes f6, queen takes f6. And here white made a move that I don't particularly like. Move makes sense, but rook c1. I don't like this position for white's rook. Obviously, white is playing this because they want to push the pawn eventually without worrying about e4 and white's knight hanging on c3. But you could do knight d5 for that. Now, after rook c1, queen f7 was played, knight d2, and knight e7. This is absolutely terrible mistake. Now, it looks like move that will make sense, but it's a bad mistake. The reason why, because black now made rook c1 move looking very good. White went knight d5, and you see after knight d5, black took, and now rook c1 looks great. The black opened the file, c file, which is a really serious mistake, and that's the cause of losing game. Bad mistake. Again, correct move is simply ignoring and castling. Now bishop d5 will be met by bishop e6, and on knight d5, now maybe also bishop d6, preventing c5 move because knight will be hanging on d5. And here, white is okay, of course, but it's hard to justify rook c1 move. Why did they play rook c1? They cannot go c5. They cannot open c file. What is rook doing on c1? Nothing. So black made a terrible move. Knight e7, and that's what justified white's rook c1 move. So after knight d2, knight e7, that's the move that is mistake, was played, and after knight d5, knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, c file is open, and position is really bad. Bishop f6 was played. This is necessary move in case white's attack to go bishop d8, which is the only way to protect in the long term this pawn on c7. But after bishop f6, queen b3, black castles, rook c2, there comes the piling up on c file. Rook c2, bishop d8, knight c4. Black hasn't started with the counterplay yet. Rook b8. And now a very interesting approach, which is normally is not good for white. I would intend to continue queen a4, queen a3, attacking, creating more weaknesses, and then try to open file with b4, rook b1, and b5. White's move was also very good. After rook b8, they went f4. And why is this move possible? Why this move is played? It's not a bad move, normally not played in this position, and very well justified in this case. And this is something we have to learn around about chess. Now let's talk about f4 move. White's target normally is a queen side. Black's is a king side. Black's plan here to advance on a king side with a g and h pawn and go f4 and create an attack. f4 move stops this attack, and the only reason it's possible that bishop is not on g7. So if black took, they will not open the bishop on g7. Bishop on c8 and d8, very passive. And black is very badly developed. So opening position of the position will favor white and white only. E takes f, g takes f, but black has to try to create counterplay on king side anyway. But when you create counterplay and you try to open positions where all your pieces on a back rank, most of the time it backfires. E4, very well played by white. G takes F. And now E5. White has absolutely killing positional threat, E6. And E6 cannot be tolerated, after which black will be absolutely lost. D takes E, knight takes. And after queen G7, D4. You see now white has very powerful knight on E5. Black's bishop are completely lost. And this is a positional nightmare. And after D4, king H7, king H1, it's just inevitable is coming. Bishop D7, all white's pieces will infiltrate on a king side, and black cannot last long here. On bishop E8, rook takes F4, and on bishop G6, knight takes G6, queen takes G6, and bishop E4. You see the F pawn is falling, king is open, and game is practically over. King H8, rook takes F5, rook takes F5, and bishop takes F5. And here rule comes in effect. I mentioned it many times on my various different DVDs. When king is open, and right now black's king is more open than white's, because black does not have any pieces to attack white's king. And if you have, while you're attacking opposite color bishops, that increases the power of initiative and the power of the attack. After queen D6, rook G3, you see game attack develops by itself. Queen F4, rook G4. Obviously, queen takes F5 is going to lose the queen. And queen C1 check, rook G1. And on queen F4, rook F1. And after queen H4, of course, the last thing white wants is to exchange queens. So queen E3 was played. And after bishop F6, queen E6. Now black has very hard time to defend. Queen G5, rook G1. They simply resign. It could have been played more precise for white, but that was good enough. So it was total disaster for black. Knight E7. Again, let me show you the critical mistake after white played rook C1. Black made is by playing knight E7. Knight E7, let white open the C file, and since then black never had an active position. All pieces went to hibernation. Bishop F6 and bishop D8 especially. So this is very instructive game, and I hope to learn something for it. Now, we will continue to one more game with similar position, and you see how unexpectedly it develops in a very early stage of the game. So G3, E5, well, don't let move order to confuse you. It's just absolute transposition to the same position. C4, D6, bishop g2, g6. Interesting that player with a black is over 100 points higher rated than player with white, but position does not recognize the ratings. So wrong play will be punished, and very well played game by white. Now, bishop g2, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, d3, knight c6, knight f3, f5, castle, knight f6, bishop g5, h6, queen takes f7, f6, rook b1. Here, black must play a5. That's the best thing I already mentioned. And after a3, castle, b4, there will be playable position. On e4, white will always have knight d5, but black can go rook b8, and after b5, knight e7, or if white goes knight d5, then simply go maybe queen d8, and on b5, knight e7. Well, this, in my opinion, is slightly better position for white, and it's very, very playable. However, here black played knight d8 move. That's not a good move, because after knight d5, must go queen f7, and all of a sudden, after this check, black is having problem. Whoever said first that it's good idea to castle in the early stage and safeguard your king, they were right. Now it's very difficult for black to castle. Now if they go c6, they will get hit with knight b6 move, and after rook b8, there may be complete disaster real quick. Cannot play bishop d7 because knight takes c7 check, and then retreating the queen. And for the same reason cannot be played queen d7, because knight takes c7. Okay, black thought it's okay, they moved the king. But it's never good to move the king in a very early stage of the game. And this is not an exception. So knight d2 is played by white, king g8, and I absolutely like f4 move. This is very correct move. White is switching from a play on a queen side to play on a king side. This voyage of the king from e8 to f8 to g8 then to h7, having knight on d8 and all pieces on back rank, this is a huge violation of basic principles of chess openings and development. So it must be punished by the white. So after f4, e takes f, knight takes f4, king h7, and e4. This is correctly opening position quickly. And again, I will say, I don't like to repeat myself, but horrible position of black's pieces make it possible. Black is in this position is absolutely lost. C6, EF, GF. Now I have to point it that after bishop takes F5 and knight takes G6, this is absolute disaster for black. Now if queen takes, rook takes F5, and you see rook cannot be taken because of bishop E4. And if king takes, simple G4, well, I don't need the position needs any comment here. This is total disaster. And now, after GF, this is positionally hopeless for black, and on top of it, they will be subjected to very strong attack by white. Knight F3, rook G8, rook B E1. You see how quickly white's pieces piling up. Rook B E1, knight E6, knight takes E6, bishop takes E6, knight H4, a clear target. Rook A to E8, queen B4, another target, bishop E5, king H1, and on king H8, queen D2, attacking H6 pawn. The game is practically over. Queen G7, knight takes F5, and rook takes F5. Now white has big positional advantage with upcoming attack with opposite color bishops, which is very dangerous for black, I already mentioned, and they have an extra pawn as well. So position is absolutely winning. Bishop takes B2, rook F1. Now this pawn was meaningless because this rook's about to destroy black's king position. After rook F1, game continued a couple of more moves. Bishop C3, queen F4, and on bishop E5, queen H4. White increases advantage by the move. Bishop E4. Now bishop G7, trying to protect the H6 weakness. Rook F7. Queen E6. And now, after a simple tactical shot, rook 1 to F6, because of the weakness on H6. Black can resign, and the only right thing they did in this game, that they did resign here. Well, now queen moves, rook is going to take on H6. Same thing is going to happen if bishop takes the rook, and if queen takes the rook, it's exactly same thing again. H6 is a vital square in this position. Very well played game for white, and again points to black's mistake. Black gave white play, very strong play in a very early stage of the game. Very instructive game. This game was played on a quite high level between two very strong players, rated 25-2400. So this was C45 as well, with quite a bit of different system for black. After G3, they didn't fianchetto the bishop on G7. After G3, knight F6, bishop G2, knight C6, knight c3, bishop b4, knight d5, bishop c5, e3. This is quite interesting to follow this game and the next game I will show you, because here you will see the quick disaster that black faced in the early stage of the game. And next game I will see with the same position, same variation, where black played a lot better in the opening because maybe player was a lot better. Next game, Karpov was black, this position. And he played much lower rated grandmaster, the same position with the black. And you will see what he went through. But first, look at this game. After bishop c5, e3 was played, d6, knight e2, and very dubious move, bishop f5. It's a bad move, simply. d4, ed, ed, bishop b6, and after bishop g5, this is already very, very bad position for black. They have to deal with this pin, and it's not an easy way to do that. And they played in this position bishop a5 check, knight went to c3, and after both sides castled, you see white can any time open black's king position by taking on f6, but there is no rush, no hurry to do that. And after rook e8, queen d2, bishop g6, rook f to e1, rook e6 was played. Now it's interesting that there is no good way of getting out of the pin. For example, if black takes and tries to play h6, they are willing to give a pawn to somehow to finish development and to come out with a queen to get rid of this pin. White has quite powerful response on h6, bishop takes, followed by rook e8 check, winning the queen. As you can see, and the game is going to be over right after that. So black tries to be creative and plays rook e6, but this is already very bad. Bishop h3 was played. Black played rook e4 because the knight is pinned. And after rook e4, knight takes f6, g takes f, bishop e3. Now, there is no need to go to the end of this game. As I already mentioned, we made a point. We see that results of the opening are very grim for black. They went rook e8. We just make few more moves, and after a3, bishop takes c3, queen takes c3, and d5 and c5. Now white has advantage in the center, weak pawn, advantage on queen side, and big advantage on king side. And there are no other areas of the board. Black is totally destroyed here. And eventually white won the game. There is no need for us to see the rest. So that's an instructive game. And now I want to show you game played by relatively unknown grandmaster from Yugoslavia, Cvitan, and against Karpov. Well, let's see what happened there. Game ended in a draw, but let's see how much trouble Karpov went through. c4, e5, g3, knight c6, bishop g2, knight f6. This is probably one of the most instructive games you can see. Knight c3, bishop b4, knight d5, bishop c5, e3, castle, knight e2, d6, and white castled. Of course, black did not play bishop f5, which is not a good move. h6, and after h6, a3, bishop went to b6, b3, rook e8, bishop b2, and eventually black took on d5, cd, knight e7, d4, knight g6, d takes e. Here, black does not have a good choice here. If knight takes on e5, white will mount this knight on d4. They have very good possibility of moving central pawns. They have good outpost of knight on d4. White is better. Karpov chose d takes e. But this too is not very pleasant position. Knight c3, bishop d7, rook c1. Eventually this bishop will be disturbed from b6 square, and black has obvious target on c7. So after rook c1, f5. And here is the interesting moment of the game. White played queen c2, which is not a bad move, but not nearly as strong as d6. Now, what will happen on d6? After d6, I don't think black can survive in any way. They don't want to go c6, because after knight a4, this pawn is very powerful, and this is absolute nightmare. Two roaring bishops on the diagonals on g2 and b2, very strong pass pawn, and possibility of having two bishop advantage. So this is not an option, but if cd, queen takes d6. Now you have to notice that black's rooks are very clumsy. They cannot get to any good position. But if white plays rook f2 d1, and power of these two bishops can absolutely annihilate black's position. Now knight on g6 is hanging, and right now I don't even know what I can recommend for black. Now on bishop e6, there will be queen b4. You see rook is going to come to d1 and knight to d5. It will be absolute nightmare. And now if e4, then knight a4. Now this bishop is super powerful. And again, the same rook fd1. I don't think black can survive this very long. And that's the way it should have been played. But white did not play d6. Now, white missed the opportunity and still had a huge advantage. Queen c2. Queen f6. rook f to d1. Now, there is a potential threat of d6, so black plays queen d6. But we know that queen is not a good piece for blockade, because it can be easily chased away. So after queen to d6, knight a4, rook a to c8. And then again, if bishop takes a4, pawn takes a4, and now white has an option of playing bishop c3, bishop b4, plus f5, pawn is hanging. Very difficult position. Rook a to c8. Now, knight c5, bishop takes c5, queen takes c5. And after b6, queen c3. This is correct because putting the queen and bishop on diagonal totally disables black's e-pawn. And after rook e7, now black totally loses concentration. What they have to do, you see the target. You somehow have to get to this target. The correct move is this bishop does not do much on the g2, and after bishop f1 with disastrous threat bishop a6, I don't think black can hold this position, and black is totally lost. That's how you take advantage of weak c-pawn. But that was missed again by white, and they played b4. But that's why black played on a previous move rook e7, that they can go e4. Finally, knight, that was only spectator standing on g6, may come into the game on e5. Of course, it opens the diagonal, but black cannot be totally passive. So e4, queen b3, king h7, b5. This is totally aimless play by white. Knight e5, a4, intending bishop a3, rook f7, bishop takes e5. Now, white played bishop takes e5 because they don't like to allow knight d3. And bishop takes e5, queen takes e5, queen b4. White is still better, but they lost big chunk of their advantage. Queen b4, rook f6, rook d4, rook d8, and on rook d to c4, queen takes d5, rook takes c7, and rook f7. Rook f7 was played, and the game after h4, bishop e6. White still has some advantage, but it's far from being enough. And with a great defender like Karpov, he managed to draw this position after rooks being exchanged. You will see that there is no big particular weaknesses for black, and white has some activity, but that's not enough. Game ended in a draw. Very instructive moment, very instructive game, and twice white missed decisive opportunities, and you see if you know well how to play this position, you can beat opponent who is much stronger than you. So here Karpov practically survived disaster twice. And if white played correct move d6 at the first time, it doesn't matter how good you are, position cannot be defended. So this is very, very instructive game. Now I would like to go over a couple of games on my own where black played English with c5. Against English they played c5 continuous. The reason I'm bringing my own games, so if I do games on English for 4 or 5 more DVDs, there is enough material. There is an unlimited number of games that were played, and a lot of them are very, very instructive. So we cannot go through all of them, but I'm giving you some samples of the game, and I'm telling you how do we analyze it, for the what are the critical points of it, and what is the white's or black's strategy should be. So, and the remaining of the games, you can find a lot of games in the database, and you can analyze using the same principle on your own. This game was played by me many years ago, like 45 years ago. It was 45 years ago, and played against Bulgarian Grandmaster Radulov. c4, c5, knight f3, knight c6. I was then already very solid master. Knight c3, g6, d4, cd, knight takes d4. Now, why am I bringing you this game? Well, this is the type of position, this exactly position, white should try to avoid. The reason why? Because black played bishop g7, it's correct move, and I played knight c2. There are other opportunities such as knight b3, which is almost the same, and e3. e3, black gets very comfortable position after knight f6 and castling and d5. Black has very comfortable position. So, and the reason why I said white should avoid playing it, because after knight c2, my opponent played f5. That's not the reason why you should avoid it. What he should have done, and queen a5, and white is going to have significant difficulties protecting their weak c pawns. For example, if we go bishop d2 for, well, knight f6, and now white may try to play f3 and e4. f3 is a useful move to stop knight e4 for black as well. Then black has very, very good position, putting pressure on c pawns, both c pawns, and there is no significance in weakening black's kingside dark squares. So the weaknesses are very important here. So that's why you should avoid to play with this move order. And now knight on d4 is hanging. Of course, we don't want to strengthen black's center, and the option I chose, knight c2, should have been met by bishop takes c3. But f5 is played, and after f5, g3, knight f6, bishop g2. And black castled, white castled, and d6. This position is clearly better for white. The reason why the position is better, because f5 is a big problem in black's position. It's compromised center, and at some point if white goes e4 and exchanges pawns here, black may have a problem defending the central pawns. Also, white has both central files open and black doesn't. So this won't be a good pawn structure. So here white has serious advantage, I think. And what happened? Rook b1, trying to play b3, getting up out of this diagonal with a rook. Bishop e6, b3, rook c8, bishop b2, a6, and knight to d5. Here black made a move which might have been the critical mistake in the game. This is the typical move. That's what you're playing for. You're playing for going b5, creating counterplay on queen side. But then, question, why f5? What f5 has to do with b5? This is counterintuitive, and in this particular situation, it's really bad, because knight takes f6, bishop takes f6, and now black has terrible position. After bishop takes c6, rook takes c6, and knight to d4. Now you see the rook is hanging, the bishop is hanging, knight has to be taken, queen takes d4, and this diagonal is overwhelming for white. So rook f6, queen e3, attacking rook and attacking bishop, and after f4, gf, queen f8 was played. The game is already totally lost. cb, rook b to c1. There is no rush in taking this rook on f6, because the rook cannot really go anywhere. And after rook a6, bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, rook c2. White has an exchange and a pawn for no compensation, and there was still a lot of moves being played, a lot of boring moves, because game completely lost significance here, and I ended up winning this game. Now you will see what in the comments to this game I mentioned something about doubling and weakening the c-pawns. That's a good example. We will see next game. This game I played against a very famous Dutch grandmaster, Jan Timman. Game was played in 1985. It was almost on the peak of his career. Knight c3, d5. The knight takes d5. g3. This is all theory. Knight c6, bishop g2, knight c7, castle, e5, d3, and now bishop e7, now at fd2. This is theoretical position, and it's Well, the possible moves are f6 or bishop d7. Try to avoid doubling pawns when white takes on c6. My opponent just castled here. And that's what I said in a previous game, that this pawn structure. So what did we do here? We doubled black pawns. Black has terrible weaknesses on the queen side, but white's light square bishop is gone, and that may give black some potentials for a king side attack. But still, the weaknesses on the c file are more important. And as a result, white has number of outposts. Knight c4, f6, b3, bishop h3, rook e1, knight e6. Black is heading towards the center with their pieces. After knight e6, bishop b2, h5. Well, it's not with idea to open the file, h file, but black tries to shake white's position a little bit, that then can go after h4 and hg, they may go f5, and slowly to open white's king's position. At the same time, you have to notice that it's not easy for white to take advantage of those pawns. So, but white creates very good the fortress position. So what happened in the game, after h5, e3 was played, queen e8, protecting the h5 pawn, and also intending queen g6. Queen e8, now very strong move, f3. Point of this move is we're going to go knight e4 and knight f2, possibly, chase the bishop away, and also creating very nice pawn formation for white. After f3, h4, knight to e4, hg, hg, and queen h5. After queen h5, queen e2, rook a d8, rook a d1. White has all pieces developed. They have very nice outposts for knights. Knight can go to f2 and chase the bishop away, and also white can go g4 and try to play king f2 with idea of playing rook h1 later. So, in my opinion here, white has a serious advantage. Rook d5 was played. Black has difficulties continue attacking. If f5, the knight retreats and e5 becomes terrible weakness. So black can't really move any pawns. So they play rook d5, knight f2, rook fd8, and now black is in trouble after f4. It's an interesting move, attacking the center on e5 and trying to exchange queens. If queens are exchanged, bishop will be hanging and e5 will be hanging. In my opinion here, black is already in trouble. I think they overlooked f4 move. Now after queen h7, queen f3, with a deadly threat of g4. g4 will trap the bishop on h3. And after queen f3, e takes f, e takes f, but now e file is opened. And after bishop f5, g4, white simply won a piece. Rook takes e6, bishop takes c4, b takes c, rook takes d1, knight takes d1, and queen c2. This was played, but after knight f2, that knight f2, bishop f8 was played. Now rook e2, white consolidated. It's still a lot of work to do to win this position, but eventually I ended up winning, converting the extra piece. Interesting pawn formation right after the opening, and that's well, after playing some games with these pawn formations, I started coming up with researching this pawn formation. That's how Gingy Indian came up when I play bishop takes c3 with black on move 3 and creating some unorthodox pawn structure positions. I think this was very interesting game in this respect. Next game I want to show you was played in a Hastings, in a tournament, famous tournament in England. It was played in 1978 against, at that time he was American, now he lives in Norway, as a grandmaster, Jonathan Tisdall. It started with knight f3, but it came kind of English position. Knight f3, d5, g3, knight f6, bishop g2, g6, c4, and after c4, bishop g7, c takes d, knight takes d5, knight c3. Now, after knight c3, knight b6, d4. Well, this is not exactly English. This is kind of a mix between English and Grunfeld, but you can get this from English opening as well. So if it's not exactly 100% English, it's still it's very close to it, and it still gives us very instructive game. So after knight b6, d4, knight c6, bishop f4, castle, castle. Castle was played, and here black played bishop g4. Now, there is tons of theory after knight takes d4 and knight takes d4. There is 3 moves for black. Queen takes d4, and white has compensation for a pawn in all these cases. Knight b5. There is a bishop takes d4, which allows immediate knight b5, and there is also e5 move. But however, people who don't know the developments of these variations very well, and it happened to me several times, they play either bishop e6, I had that in my games, and bishop g4. Bishop g4 was played by Tisdall in this game, d5, bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, knight e5, bishop g2, c6, e4. Now this is, right now, it's typical position that can come out from English defense. So c6, e4, c takes d, e takes d, and knight ec4. Now, how do we evaluate this position? I think white is significantly better because they have two bishops, an open e file, potential weakness on e7. Black could have played knight takes b2, but I think white still has solid advantage after queen takes b2, knight a4. Here white has even two options. One is simply to take on b7 and play somehow rook a to e1, putting pressure on black's position. And second option is knight takes a4, getting three minor pieces for a queen, which is most of the time very good for a side who has minor pieces. Anyway, that's not what black played. They did not play knight takes b2, and after queen e2, rook c8, rook a c1, queen d7, b3, knight d6, bishop e5. Now here black is slowly suffocating. So white wants to take on g7, put more pressure on e7 pawn, and black has virtually no counterplay. Bishop h6, rook cd1, rook fe2 e8, h4, and now black is almost in a Zugzwang. Well, it's rook fe. After h4, black has no useful moves. There is almost nothing can be done. On bishop g7, we're gonna play simply take and rook e1. Then why did they play bishop h6? But black still played bishop g7. That shows that how they are lost. They don't know what to do in this position. The position is really bad. Bishop takes g7, king takes g7. Now simply queen b2, king g8, and rook f e1. It's very difficult to suggest anything reasonable for black. Queen f5, knight e4, knight d7, queen to d4, completely dominating position by white. Knight takes e4, rook takes e4. e7 pawn is going to crumble at any time. Knight c2, knight c5, rook e2, and after b6, rook d to e1. This is the danger of this type of positions. That not that black is going to get crushed, that black will end up with no counterplay, and absolutely white slowly strangling black in this position. And after knight c5, rook e2, b6, rook e1, knight d3 was played. That's a desperation move that loses right away after g4, and that's what happened, and black lost knight. But it's they kind of put themselves out of misery. There is no reasonable move here, no good way to play, and the position is totally lost. I think it's very instructive game. The game that I want to show you now is not been played very well by black. Black lost quickly. But the variations surrounding this game and this theoretical position is extremely important to know, because this is old variation. It's been around for, I don't know, 70 years. It's been developing, and it's very significant for English players. So let's look at it. c4, c5, knight f3, knight f6, and the position that I want to show you can arise several different ways. White can play in this move orders. It's a normal move order: d4, cd, knight takes d4, e6. This is probably one of the oldest positions of English opening. Bishop g2, and here e5 move. Now this move is very old. It's been played on a highest level, on a world championship level, some 50-60 years ago. Was played by Keres and Botvinnik, and later on it was played by Kasparov for both sides. Has a lot of history. Okay. However, well, knight f3 is the main move, and the main move for black is d4. Of course, knight takes c5 would lose a piece right away. And white castles, after which black must protect the pawn, knight c6. Of course, white cannot tolerate black's center, and since they are slightly ahead in development, they try to dismantle the center by playing e3. And here, theoretically, bishop e7 many years ago was the most popular move. Number of games on the highest level, even in a candidates tournament, World Championship candidates tournament, for a couple games ended in a quick draw in a 4 or 5 moves. ED, let me show you how the games ended. ED, rook e1 castle, knight d2, and black would play bishop c5, and after knight b3, queen b6. So this was very popular, and at some point black was very comfortable in this position. So research started here from this position after bishop e7. And as a result, white came with very interesting possibility. ED, ED, and instead of playing rook e1, play bishop f4. When black castled, then white went knight e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5. And white starts immediate attack on assault on d4 pawn. And after bishop c5, knight d2, preparing knight b3, which may be very dangerous. But still, black came out with very interesting opportunity. Knight g4, and after bishop f4, knight e3 move. And when this move was played, gained on the highest level ended in a draw in 2 moves. White took the knight, black took back. Now this knight is hanging and e2 is a threat. King h1, e takes d, and they agreed to a draw. This is right decision because after exchange of queens, neither side has any advantage. Bishop takes b7, rook b8. So this agreed to a draw. And this draw was valid for several years. But then Paul Gajewski, the Grandmaster Paul Gajewski, noticed, remember, this was all development that cannot be happening today because today we have computers. They quickly diagnose what is right, what is wrong in this type of positions. And this position, without computers, then, I believe it was in early 70s, he came up with the queen h5 move, miraculously, somehow, mysteriously, actually, that was missed. And now black is losing. This simple move was missed by everyone. So if e2, now queen takes c5, and white simply is winning because they have 2 minor pieces for rook. And there is no other way to do anything. So black is lost. And actually this happened in a game, and white is lost. White won in few moves from here. So then it's black's turn to come up with something different. And they came up with a different move, not bishop e7, but bishop c5. And research and discussion continued. What happened here? White took, black took, and white gave check. And this is the reason why black played bishop e7. They were worried about this check. But it turned out that this check does not represent any problems for black because of bishop e6. And now if white tries knight g5, simply castle, knight takes e6 fe, and it's way too dangerous for white to take the pawn on e6 because black will go d3, and you see f2 pawn is significantly weak. Well, maybe not even d3 right away, maybe first queen d7, chasing the rook away and then going d3 and rook e8 with the weakness on f2. Black has more than sufficient compensation. So, again, black is still alive by playing bishop c5. Okay, now it's white's turn to come up with something new. And I was proud, actually, what I found in this position. I found in this position some very, very interesting resource for white that was not mentioned before. It's counterintuitive, e takes d, and not to play rook e1 check. And this is the game I'm showing you. I played it twice. I played against German Grandmaster Lobron, and I got to completely winning position. I made one simple blunder and lost. And I played second time, and I got winning position. I didn't get winning position. I just won in the opening. So let me discuss both of these games. Knight d2 move. Well, what's the point of this move? Now, well, it's a point is obvious, called knight b3. What is the point not to play rook e1 check? After castle, knight b3. It's a very, very subtle tactical resource here. Queen b6. Now, black somehow has to keep the pawn on d4 alive, which eventually is going to be a very strong pawn because it's a pass pawn. Now bishop g5. And what to do here for black? Black can play knight e4, and that's what was played against me by Eric Lobron. And this is really bad continuation for black. I played rook e1, which is correct move. Knight takes g5, and now knight takes g5. And that's how both of my games continued. In a Lobron game, he played h6 here, and I played knight takes f7. This is absolutely winning the move. Rook takes f7, and now bishop d5. At this point, black has no defense. The threat is, just to show you the threat is bishop takes f7, then go queen h5 check, and take the bishop on c5. So what he did after bishop d5, he retreated his bishop to f8. And I failed here to find very simple and quick win. Bishop takes f7 wins immediately for white. King takes f7. Now black has two minor pieces for rook, but after queen f3 check, king g8 and rook e8, they can absolutely resign. There is no way to defend the bishop on f8, and on queen b4 simply c5, and game is over. That was a simply missed opportunity. And interestingly enough, this position is already very, very bad for black. Very bad, not because of some positional weaknesses, because they have no defense in this position. Well, I already mentioned, well, there's a threat of knight takes h7 and queen h5 check. And on h6, we already saw how white wins by fourth. And my other game was continued, bishop f5. That looks like most natural move, but that's the move Eric Lobron did not play because he saw that there is a disaster for black if they make this move. There's a white simply gets completely winning position after bishop takes c6. It's counterintuitive move also. Queen takes c6 and rook e5, attacking two bishops. And that's actually how it happened in my second game, which I won in a couple of moves. And black must play queen f6 in order not to lose a piece right away. Rook takes c5, queen takes g5, knight takes d4, and now g6 is the only move, because on rook d8, white simply plays rook takes f5. g6 is the only move, and after knight takes f5, gf, white has extra pawn, decisive positional advantage, and position is totally hopeless for black. This is the best black can do after bishop takes c6. Taking with a pawn simply loses in one move. They just lose the bishop. On f6 we take one bishop, and then we take the other bishop. Black takes. So position is totally hopeless. Very, very interesting variation. And that's how theory gets updated. This is 100% typical English. Not the English where one side tries to build up play on a king side and the other on queen side. This is one of the opening variations, one of the sharp variations of English. And that's how theory gets developed, updated, and eventually we can come up with some very, very interesting stuff. So I hope you enjoyed some sample games of English, and of course it's far from covering complete English, but I can tell you this, that those games are instructive, and you can come up with few hundred more instructive games in different variations. But we only have so much time, and we can only put so many games to your attention. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy playing English. Thank you.